This week has been the What If week. We've had some really inspiring conversations, which if you've missed them, you can now find online. I'm Rhiannon Colvin, and with my colleague Rob Hopkins, I'm your co-host for this evening. On behalf of the whole Transition Balance Forwards team, it's my delight to welcome you all here for what's going to be a great evening. All three events this week have been incredible, a tonic after the year we've had, and this one promises to be absolutely the cherry on the cake. This week has been about imagination, possibility, vision, and hope. As the great Angela Davis once said, you have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it all the time. This evening, we'll be spending time with four amazing guests who do that. And by the end of the evening, it's our firm hope that you will too. We're going to open this evening with the second poem of the summit by Fedzilla, the summit's poet laureate. Fedzilla, over to you.
Thank you. Good evening to everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be opening this today. The following piece is simply called, What If? What is what if? Is it just a question, a preposition, a proposal? So you're expecting a submission. Now, what if could be a quick mention, an idea extension, or a needed suggestion to ease the tension. Now, what if in itself cannot guarantee results, but is the first step in the right direction? So what if we give it just a little inspection? What comes next is the intention. Is it for encouragement, or was that what if really for protection? Is it an idea for the future, or are we going back to learn that lesson? What is what if? And how can I give it more attention? Now, what if can be so dejecting. With just one phrase, one doubt, it can crush your ambition. And the worst part of all, it's not always from the outside. I'm doing it to me from the inside. Now, what if can be so dejecting? What if they don't like it? What if she never reads it? What if we don't make that midnight deadline? And what if I don't succeed in this either? And what if I can't find the time? And what if I'm not good enough? And what if I fail? And what if I'm not meant for this stuff? But what if should be a tool, not self-inflicted vengeance. I would like it to be a creative spark, a contagious catalyst, not some lifelong shackling sentence. Let us choose new paths and get a bit more inventive. What if, what if, what if, what if, what if could be so tremendous? Build a great wall? No, we build the great small. We start with a blueprint that can be evolved. We fit it to your usage, we bring in new views, and we make it more inclusive. Like, what if we took play seriously? Like vitamin B, C, D, and E, a daily dose for the whole family. Everyone knows, a play a day to keep the doctor away. And the older you grow, the more you need to tumble and run and play in the dirt and lay in the sun. Everyone knows. Everyone learned this when they were young. Now, what if this was actually advised by healthcare professionals? Paid leave for play dates. Ma'am, please take the next 3 days off and spend it with your playmates. What if there was a national consensus to outlaw signs that discourage playing? We see them every day, in fact. No ball games and no playing on the grass. What if Parliament made a law and it passed? And no ball games are now a thing of the past. The old timers, though, they might remember those days if you asked. What if we followed nature's lead? What if we followed birds and trees? What if we followed earth and bees? What if we could just work around nature and what it needs and still live abundantly? I'm on a roll. Let me proceed. Let's go deep. Because what if is starting to become an incredibly infectious question indeed. Like, what if we had the skills and abilities to talk to decision makers? Upgrade. What if we were the decision makers? They say talk is cheap. Update. I'll sweeten the deal. Talk is free. So let's talk and see. Come and take a walk outside with me, shall we? Because what if can be an incredibly infectious question indeed. For example, what if the streets had fruit trees? Apples, oranges, cherries, pears, plums, and berries just sitting there, plump and merry. Free for all, there's always plenty. In our city, there's an orchard for each postcode. And what if that was the community's high street, their focal crossroad? What if the only thing exchanged in alleys, in little baggies that made people so happy are the seeds for next year's fruit trees? We will plant them in the schools and in the valleys. And what if the only healthy competition that we see is between neighbors competing to see whose seeds have the best flavor? Sounds pretty good to me. What if the M25 was a thick, dense forest and its origins dated back to an old folk tale from a long time ago? They called it the Ring Road. Yeah, back in a time when humans drove, I know, cold metal floors, hours in traffic. They're outside, but they're not outdoors. Sitting in these steel crates run by juice from old dinosaurs. Crazy, isn't it so? What if I lived in a city where the birdsong was louder than these traffic and these cars? What if cities relocalized their food systems? No need for windows with bars, and our children go to the outdoor cinema to see the real stars. What if we had proper politics for our children's future? That means free colleges and not fee inclusive, not race exclusive. Our children will never hear race excuses. I could go on for days, but what if I'm only human? If we talk about the future, let's speak with conviction. Speak of your dreams with ambitions and be bold in your mission. Unapologetically hopeful is my minuato. And the potential is so vast. And now that I have what if, every question has become a new path. And time after time, whenever these doubts creep up, come back, when my ideas linger, when I'm doubting my craft and I can't get my motivation on track, and when it seems too ambitious and you feel that feedback might get too vicious, just stop and think back. The only question I will ever regret is what if? What if I had never asked?
Wow. Bedzilla, thank you so much. My goodness me, that was absolutely beautiful. And yes, people who are asking, so the recording of this has been recorded and will go up as part of the video for this evening. Fedzilla, thank you so much. And Fedzilla will be back one more time later in the summit. So before we introduce our guests, I want to share a very short video with you, which in fact features one of our guests for this evening. Some of you may know that I host a podcast called From What If to What Next. And as part of every episode, we ask the guests to share their vision of the 2030 that is the result of everything that could possibly have been done between now and 2030 being done. And I've been working on for a while with two amazing animators, Temujin Gunawardena and Baj Whipple, to animate some clips from those parts of the podcast. And we've made 3 very short videos. And just to set the mood for our chat this evening, I want to just share episode 1 with you.
We're going to be using re in our language. We're going to be rebuilding, refurbishing, remaking, reusing, recreating, reinventing. The re is going to be a big part of our language.
Police and prisons and the armed forces were massively defunded, and that money has gone into robust preventative health care and well-being programs that also contribute to a rich imagination.
Financial insecurity has been eradicated. People no longer go to work because they have no choice.
And so all these workspaces that used to be occupied by big banks are now, of course, being redirected and used for creative spaces of all sorts, whether it's technical or artistry.
If you see girlfriends meet each other, they won't say, oh, you got this new dress, but they will say, oh, you got the same dress that you wore last week, but now you've made a little change about it. And that's so fancy and that's so fashionable.
Thank you. Rhiannon, over to you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Rob. I'm really excited to see more of those. They look great. So on to tonight, you are really into something very special. This evening, we are so fortunate to be joined by not our usual 3, but 5 amazing guests. And it's a huge pleasure to welcome them to this webinar. So we'll be joined by Kate Raworth, who is an economist focused on making economics fit for the 21st century. She is the author of Doughnut Economics and co-founder of Doughnut Economics Action Lab, which works with chain makers to turn Doughnut Economics from a radical idea into transformative action. We'll also be joined by Mia Birdsong, who is an author, activist, facilitator, and senior fellow of the Economic Security Project. Her book, How We Show Up, Reclaiming Family, Friendship, and Community, charts swathes of community life that point us towards the promise of our collective vitality. She is creator and host of the podcast More Than Enough from The Nation magazine, which expands the current guaranteed income movement by tapping into the voices and visions of low-income people. Amir is joining us from Oakland in California this evening. Then we have Carne Ross, who is a writer and former diplomat. He served for 15 years in the British Foreign Office and resigned after giving secret evidence into the first official inquiry into the Iraq War. Subsequently, he founded Independent Diplomat, the world's first non-profit diplomatic advisory group that supports democratic governments and political movements around the world. He is the author of The Leaderless Revolution, How Ordinary People Will Take Power and Change Politics in the 21st Century. And we're delighted to introduce not one, but 2 keynote listeners for this evening. We have Cassie Robinson. Cassie is Deputy Director of Funding Strategy at the National Lottery Community Fund, where she's responsible for innovation, policy and practice, and oversees the Climate Action Fund, the Digital Fund, and the Emerging Futures Fund. And Chidi Oti Obenara, who describes himself as a constructive environmentalist and a conditional optimist. He was the former finance officer for the Green Party of England and Wales and has spent 15 years working mainly in investment banking. He ran as Green Party parliamentary candidate in 2017 and as mayoral candidate for Newham in 2018. And so for those of you that aren't used to this, keynote listeners are basically, rather than a keynote speaker, a listener is someone who listens to the session and then offers their reflections and thoughts at the end of the session. So Cassie and Chidi, we look forward to hearing those as we draw the event to a close. Thank you all so much for joining us.
So I'd like to invite each of our speakers to share 8 to 10 minutes with us of their reflections on a couple of questions. And we'll ask each of you to reflect in whatever way you feel you'd like to on how it might be that we might better unlock the collective imagination and what policies or shifts might accelerate that, and what might it look like and feel like if we actually managed it. If the imagination can be defined as the ability to see things as if they could be otherwise, and if, as Mariame Kaba writes in her new book, we live in a society that has been locked into a false sense of inevitability, how do we urgently and massively shift that? How best to spark a revolution of the imagination? Big questions. We're going to start with you, Kate, if we might. Kate Raworth, over to you.
Thank you, Robin. Big pleasure to join everybody here. So I'm going to share my screen because I want to take you all straight away to a place of great imagination, of course. This is your first economics lecture. And here we are sitting in Econ 101. We're about to begin. Now, there is a great inevitability to about what's about to happen next, because almost every first economics lecture the world over starts like this. Welcome to economics, here is supply and demand. And my big what if moment was thinking, what if instead of starting like this, economics started like this? What kind of economy would bring humanity into the donut? And I reflect on this and just thought, if the very first thing you did in the very first economics lecture was this, the entire degree, the entire training, the entire mindset would be completely transformed. So what is the donut? I'm talking about this picture. The idea is leave nobody in the hole in the middle, falling short on the essentials of life, but don't overshoot the outer ring where we break down the life supporting systems of our planet. We've got to meet the needs of all people within the means of the living planet. That's the donut. And I first drew this by doodling on some work of amazing Earth system scientists back in 2012 and redrew it. And over the years, started riffing with this what if question. So what if we could all sit at the donut table and ask ourselves, how does my own lifestyle impact humanity's ability to live in the donut? How I wash my hair, the shirt I wear, the coffee I drink. What if every city were designed using the donut on the design table? What if every company drew up its corporate strategy around this table and put its products in the middle? Now, as you can see, this is me playing with Photoshop. But while I was sitting there playing with Photoshop, all sorts of people actually started up and did this. And architects in Copenhagen sent me pictures and saying, well, I have the donut on my design table. We're teaching this in school. We've made a game. We've made some glasses. We've got this on our corporate table when we make decisions. And it was really clear that people had picked this idea up and started playing with it. So the first learning there for me was when you give an idea in economics, a name so ridiculous as Doughnut Economics. Like, a lot of people are afraid of economics, but nobody's afraid of donuts. People felt permission to start playing. When all this started coming at us and we realized people were playing, then I thought, okay, this is time to go beyond an idea on the page of a book. We've got to set up an organization, which began in my kitchen, just a little cluster of people thinking of Doughnut Economics Action Lab. We then created a community design team, got lots of people who we knew would be future members, help us design a really great platform that people want to join. And we launched it in September last year, a place where people can become members and pick up the core ideas of Doughnut Economics and put them into practice themselves. Then in Amsterdam, a group said, well, we're going to create a local coalition here. And suddenly all these local coalitions, totally inspired by what they did in Amsterdam, the power of peer-to-peer inspiration, they all started popping up. Well, if you did it here, we're going to do it here. And I actually seen in the chat, there's a bunch of people from these and many other coalitions in this call, which is fantastic. And then the coalition folks got together and said, well, let's start having a conversation between us and working together. So this amazing self-organizing system began to happen. Here's one of the core tools that we've been sharing so far. So I'm just going to help scale the donut down, and let's just take it to the city of Amsterdam, which was where we began. Here's the question, and almost all of our work is around questions. How can Amsterdam become a home to thriving people and a thriving place while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet? And that breaks down into 4 questions. So what would it mean for the people of Amsterdam to thrive? Well, guess what? It's the people of Amsterdam who have to answer that question in their full diversity, respecting the multiple cultures, values, histories of those people. What would it mean for Amsterdam to thrive within its natural habitat? Where is Amsterdam on the surface of planet Earth? And what is nature's genius there? And this is the local aspiration that we invite people to explore. And in fact, many cities only go this far, but we know that every city is embedded in global contexts of relationships with people and planet worldwide. So what would it mean for Amsterdam to respect the health of the whole planet, pull itself back within an ecological footprint, and also to respect the work and the conditions and the communities of all the people in those global supply chains? So this is the essence of what we call our Doughnut City Portrait. It's a set of questions that we then invite each place to take and answer themselves in their own way. Now, we began doing this actually with Portland, Philadelphia, and Amsterdam, and here are workshops we held. As you can see, it was 2019, nobody had heard of COVID. It was wonderful workshops where people were, city policymakers and community members were just beginning to imagine the futures of their cities through this tool. And then everything got stopped due to COVID. But all these local groups popped up, and what we've just loved at Doughnut Economics Action Lab is the amazing energy that local organizations like this Devon Doughnut Collective just popped up and said, well, this is how we're going to do it. We're creating our own and we're designing it like this. And these are our ideas. We're going to do a Doughnut People's Assembly in 2022. In Melbourne, and they created an organization called Regen Melbourne, and they dived really deep. All 4 of these beautiful pictures are talking about what does it mean for the people of Melbourne to thrive, going in deep and bringing out the multiplicity of meanings and contexts that could have. And then from a Maori interpretation in New Zealand to the beginning of Doughnut Economics in Barbados to the donut idea in Brussels. The thrilling thing for those of us who work at Doughnut Economics Action Lab, and my colleague Rob Short, who I know is on this call as well, who's actually really leading our work with these groups. The thrilling thing is when every day a new idea pops up on our platform and someone's drawn the donut in a way we've never seen it before. They've come up with a new diagram. They've just, there's such energy being released. So I'm just going to finish by reflecting on how we are organizing ourselves as an organization to host and support and celebrate this incredible energy that's being unleashed just around this very simple picture. So our first principle is to be playfully creative, and the donut demands that in a way because it's so silly as a concept in economics. But as you can see from the pictures, people are just taken off with it. And of course, it's fear that shuts us down. And when people are not afraid, that's a wonderful space to start being playful and to laugh. And when we're laughing, then we know the lid's off. Go where the energy is. So we just follow where the energy is. We don't never knock on a shut door. Everybody who we work with is because they've chosen to come to this tool. So we've never begged, asked, requested anybody to say, would you show the donut, talk about the donut, engage with the donut? Why? There's so many tools in the world, and only engage with those that people actually find this unleashes something for us and we choose it. Peer-to-peer inspiration is everything. It's the power of a mayor inspiring a mayor, or community activist inspiring community activist, and every week, literally, the complexity, the beauty, the imagination that's going into the new ways that different groups are playing with this and unpacking it and reinventing it is just multiplying. It's phenomenal and very humbling to see. We need to balance openness with integrity as an organization. So we're giving away these tools and saying, hey, play with it, mix it up. But of course, at the heart of that, we want people to run with it with their imagination, but still keep an integrity of the ideas. And that's probably one of the big principles at the heart of our work. How do we make sure that it doesn't get misconstrued, or even worse, by particularly in the sphere of business, our fear is it gets co-opted. So we're always thinking like openness and integrity, and how to enable that imaginative play around a core concept. We want to be agile and adaptive. We want to be a small team with a big impact. And that immediately means we work with these incredible change makers who are reinventing and bringing the work back. And unleashing imagination in a way that we hadn't seen. And then lastly, don't be the movement, join the movement. What we're focusing on is creating tools that others can draw into their own work. It's not something that you have to do this, then this, then this, then this. Take it into your own work, mix it up with other things that you use. And again, that seems to be, we get a lot of people come back saying, thank you for letting us reinvent this and doing it in a way that works in our city, in our town, in our community, so that we're not put in your box, but we can take what you've created and open it up in the space that we are already playing in. So I'm going to stop there. And invite, of course, anybody here who wants to explore what we're doing at doughuteconomics.org. You're welcome to join as a member. And to all the change makers on this call already who I know are involved, thank you, because without the imagination that you are bringing to this, there'd be no story to tell here. It would still be 2 circles on the page of a book, and it's being transformed by people picking it up and bringing their imagination to it and letting it rip. So I'll stop there. Thank you. Thank you,
Kate, so much. One of the things I always love about the donut is the imagination thrives best when it has limits, you know, and it's such a beautiful limit. It imposes the limit, but it reveals it as the most tremendous opportunity for imagination and creative thinking. Thank you so much for sharing with us this evening, Kate. And we're going to move on to our next guest now, Carne Ross. Carne, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Very nice to meet you all virtually. Thank you, Kate, for that inspiring talk. I thought I'd talk a little bit about some principles too that we might follow in pursuing our imagination. But to try to answer the question that you've put to us, I was thinking about some of the anarchists I've been reading in the last few days, such as Emma Goldman and Peter Kropotkin from the 19th century, who dared to imagine a perfect society. And clearly, somewhere along the line, we've given ourselves, or we've taken away the permission to think of a perfect society. Utopianism and idealism have become dirty words almost. The most we're allowed to think of is a sustainable society with a reasonable degree of inequality, or with a reasonable degree of equality. And this seems a rather uninspiring vision to animate our actions. And instead, we need to think of perfection and the ideal and the utopia, because this is what drove the revolutionaries of the 19th century and enabled them and energized them to make the enormous sacrifices that they made, that sometimes led to revolution, sometimes led to prison, sometimes led to destitution, but sometimes led to great liberation. And I'm inspired by that example of their idealism. But what I wanted to do today was just share some principles that I think might be important if you are pursuing your own imagination, your own vision of change. And let me start with the first principle, which is perhaps the most important, which is, what should your ideal be? Where should your imagination lead you? How do you excavate your convictions? And this is arguably the most personal principle of all, because only you can answer what that motivation can be. When I was very lost after I resigned from the Foreign Office, I asked myself what it was that I wanted to do, where was my purpose? And one way I tried to answer that question was try to hack down and work out what it was that made me most upset. What was the thing that made me most angry? And I realized it was an issue I'd worked on when I was a diplomat at the UN Security Council, which is the Western Sahara, which is a part of the world which is illegally occupied by another country, Morocco, and where the people have been dispossessed of their land despite the ruling of international law that they should have a referendum on their future and liberation and self-determination. And this issue made me very angry, and at the injustice that I saw, and the fact that this issue was so neglected. And I decided to found a non-profit organization that became Independent Diplomat to support the representatives of the Sahrawi people of the Western Sahara, an organization that's still going strong 16 years later and still supporting the representatives of the Sahrawi people. The second principle I would suggest is how to analyze power. Who's got the money and who's got the gun? Where does power lie? Who are the political donors? Who is taking the decisions? Who is writing the laws? When I was part of Occupy Wall Street back in the Zuccotti Park days in New York City, where I then lived, I joined with others in a financial reform working group, and we tried to set up a new cooperative bank. And we learned a lot about how finance and banking worked in America. And one of the things that really shocked us was discovering that banking laws are in fact written by the lobbyists in America, that lobbyists actually prepare the text of what they want to see in banking legislation and hand it over to their pet congressmen and senators to enact into legislation. This is actually true. It's a remarkable and blatant piece of manipulation and cheating the system. The big banks, of course, pay those lobbyists to write the legislation, but this helps you understand, where does banking legislation come from? It's not a democratic process. Who runs the banking world? Well, it's the banks. Who legislates that world? It is the banks. So who's got the money, who's got the guns, gives you a pretty good sense of who's taking the decision and where the power lies. The third principle is act as if the means are the ends. Both capitalism and, to a degree, I dare say, socialism offer a future that is better. But in fact, the present is everlasting. We live in the present. And we should design our action to achieve the end we wish with that end in mind, and trying to instantiate that end in the very thing that we're doing. The perfect example of this is Gandhi's Salt Satyagraha, which many participants will probably know of, where Gandhi took on the British imperialists by marching to the coast to make salt, which was then illegal under the British imperial laws in India, thus demonstrating by his very action that the injustice that the Indian people had to suffer on, and challenging that injustice by breaking the law, by doing the thing that they were not permitted to do. It was a perfect example of action, means and ends aligning with one another. And it's in arguably the perfect political action. Try to design a political action that actually embodies the change you wish to see. If XR could do this, for instance, I'm sure they would find it immensely powerful if they could somehow design an action. It's not easy, and I'm a huge supporter of XR, but if they could somehow design an action that fulfilled their objective of a world free of carbon. The fourth principle is ask, don't assume. In my more pretentious days, I used to call this the cosmopolitan criterion. Always ask others what they wish from your action rather than assume you know. This is why the golden rule, the famous Christian golden rule, is so imperfect, which tells us that we should do as we would be done by, when in fact, of course, we don't know how others wish to be treated. We should treat them as they wish to be treated. And there's a very pragmatic reason for this, because in any political action, it is other people who will know better what to do to affect their own circumstances rather than me. So the best way to design the political action that we wish to implement would be to ask them. There's another very practical reason for that, which is other people are the most inspiring. The fifth principle, address those suffering the most. That's because not out of any moral worth, though you can argue it is out of moral worth, but because there is where you'll make the biggest difference. And suffering is arguably much more measurable. Deprivation, hunger, poverty is much more easily measurable than well-being. This is why governments find it so difficult to maximize well-being, when in fact they would better direct their attention to minimizing suffering. The sixth principle, everybody gets to decide. We don't live in a democracy. We live in a sort of pseudo-democracy where the few decide for the many, a few voted for by a minority who are accessible only by a much smaller minority. When experiments in mass democracies, such as in Porto Alegre in Brazil, have demonstrated that you get far better social outcomes in terms of equality, provision of public services, and indeed in lessening corruption when the many take decisions for the many. In Porto Alegre, many tens of thousands took part in budget decisions to guide the government and achieved extraordinary outcomes. This is not according to me, it's according to the World Bank. The seventh principle to guide our imagination is big picture, small deeds. This axiom was given to me by coincidence, an innovation company called What If? And the idea is we all need a big idea to inspire ourselves. We need to see something dramatic and global to inspire our action and our energy, but we can only take small steps towards that. The exciting thing is, though, now we live in a highly connected world, a world that is ever more connected. There are billions and billions of actors connected by only a few steps of electronic communication. That means change can transmit incredibly fast now. Your small step may be imitated by others and lead to system-wide change with incredible rapidity. Think of the Me Too movement or Black Lives Matter, how quickly these movements spread into global phenomena that changed our attitudes globally towards gender and towards race relations. Change can be transmitted very, very quickly indeed. The eighth principle, use nonviolence. Surely this should be self-evident that we shouldn't use violence in pursuing our ends. But nonviolence is not inaction. It's not an absence of violence. It's actually very substantive action. It can be as mild as non-cooperation, refusing to leave the lunch counter in Greensboro, where young Black men stood up against race discrimination and helped fuel a movement that led to the end of the Jim Crow laws in America, or in Holland, where customers of a bank where the executives had paid themselves hugely generous bonuses withdrew all of their deposits and made the executives reverse their bonuses. But I'll conclude with my final principle, which is kill the king. What is the goal in chess? Kill the king. Always keep your objective in mind. always keep the goal in the middle of your sights. Don't be satisfied with process, but only be satisfied with results. If a petition against genocide in Darfur or Xinjiang is not ending the killing of people in Xinjiang or Darfur, then it's not doing any good. A treaty on climate change is only successful if the concentration on carbon in the atmosphere is actually declining. Always keep that goal in mind. Always be ready to kill the king. Thank you very much.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Carne. Fantastic. So much to digest and to reflect on later there. Thank you. And lastly, Mia. Mia, over to you.
Thank you. Kill the king, eat the rich. I'm here for all of it. When I think about like where I can find answers to something big, like how do we unlock our imaginations to create the future we want and need, I have learned to look where it's already happening. I look to who is already, whose imagination has already been unlocked in some way, that they're imagining a future that doesn't exist. And the people who've taught me most about what's possible are the people for whom what is the most intolerable. For example, if you're a gender nonconforming person living in a world that only recognizes binary genders, you can't fully exist here, so you change it. You create gender pronouns for yourself. You develop ideology and lexicon. You re-examine the science about what gender is. You learn the history of gender in your own and other cultures. You build community with others like you. You build communities with those who are not like you, who see the truth that you are making apparent. And then the world that you live in suddenly has more space for you. James Baldwin said that the place in which I'll fit will not exist until I make it. So if you do not fit in this world, you make a different one. And then that one exists not just for you, but for everyone. The other thing I think about is, how do we get to the future, right? I mean, obviously, like, the passage of time takes care of that in some ways for us, but the fact is we're never actually in the future. We are only in the present. The future is a thing that we imagine. But we build the future we want in the present, and we do that by practicing it. We work on our own mindsets and excavating the limitations that we've expected, either because of things like, you know, patriarchy and white supremacy and capitalism, like forms of oppression that we've internalized, or things that we've internalized because of our upbringing. Like if your dad was overly critical or your school made you feel like you weren't smart. We build culture and structure with our own communities, and we change the language we use with each other. We fill in the gaps that are left by dysfunctional governments and institutions. When I look at the last year of living in a global pandemic, and specifically here in the Bay Area where I live, and I think about all of the mutual aid groups that sprang into action to ensure that elders and disabled people had their basic needs met, I see the ways in which we are capable of imagining something else. And that those places where we are making a way out of no way, where we're filling in the gaps that are left by our institutions, are the places where we actually build the future we want. We participate in civic life. We vote, we protest, we write our elected officials, we clean up parks, we use the power of our voices and our resources. And when I think about America, or where I live here in Oakland, I know that because I have been doing those things for years with my own community, that the reality that I experience is very different from the reality that I think most people in America experience, because I've been working collectively with my community to make something else. And in my reality, I'm less limited. I'm more free. And my imagination is less restricted by both systems of oppression and the limitations that I learned. growing up. And I'll give you an example of like what that looks like. So a lot of the work that I've done over the last few years has been about guaranteed income, and specifically talking with and learning from the people who would be most positively impacted by guaranteed income, which is like people who don't have money. And as I've gone around the country talking with those folks, but then also talking with, you know, policymakers and philanthropists and elected officials about guaranteed income, the question, this is before the pandemic, now that the pandemic has happened, everybody's like, oh yeah, we can totally do that. But a couple of years ago, right, like guaranteed income for most Americans seemed just like completely bananas and like a utopian idea that could never happen. So as I'm talking to people about it, all these decision makers, there's all this like hand wringing about, you know, well, if we do this, then like, what about, there's all this like, what abouting? What about education? What about housing? What about the environment? And I realized in those conversations that those choices didn't occur to me because I'm in an environment with other people whose thinking is expansive enough to know that we don't have to choose between all the things that we should all have, right? We should have guaranteed income. We should have affordable or free housing. We should have access to clean water and clean air. We should have access to all of these things, and we don't have to choose between one and the other. And because I have cultivated with my community a way of thinking about what we all deserve that is expansive, those limitations didn't occur to me. The other thing that I think about is about like, where is the future? So when I was growing up, I thought of the future as, you know, flying cars and human settlements on Mars. And I loved and still love speculative fiction. And what is imagining the future if not a practice of speculative fiction? But at the same time, I've come to realize that most of the things that I really care about, which is not flying cars, existed in our past. So going back to the gender binary, right? The gender binary is a very Western, and in the context of human history, a very recent development. Many of us have cultures in which a long time ago, there was fluidity around gender. We, in our past, didn't have prisons and policing. We have cultures where historically men were not in charge, in which harm was addressed with accountability and repair instead of punishment. We all come from cultures in which at some point, everyone's basic needs were met, in which elders and disabled people were cared for and honored, in which we recognized family in multiple forms outside of biology, in which we recognized the redwoods, the crows, the mountains, and the rivers as our kin. And we knew ourselves to be part of the natural world. We knew that we were nature, that nature was never something that you had to return to. It was just something that you were of. We have ancestral memory of what it is like to belong deeply to loved ones, to be in the beloved community. We unlock our imaginations by being in relationship with each other and by practicing the future that we want for ourselves. We manifest that future for our descendants. That's all I have to say for now.
Thank you so much, Mia. And yeah, just so many rich things that you shared with us there. I just want to pick up a couple of sentences that really landed for me. That one you shared, the people who have taught me the most about what's possible are the people for whom right now is most intolerable. I think that's a really, really powerful sentence. And yeah, I'm also really grateful for you picking up on the ideas of universal basic income and guaranteed income and what a powerful transformational policy that could be. And also this thing of learning from our past and our history in order to help us think about the future as well. I think that's a really powerful framing there. So thank you to all our speakers that have just shared so many wonderful ideas, and there's obviously a lot to think about there. We're firm believers in giving time to digest, especially after such an expansive range of ideas. So we're going to put you into breakout rooms now with the invitation to consider 3 questions. So the first, which ideas were new to you and interesting to you? What inspired you to action? What moved you? And any questions that have been bubbling up whilst you've been hearing our speakers, because we'll be having a Q&A after the breakout rooms. So you'll have between 10 and 15 minutes, I think we've got in there, in groups of 3 or 4, and please try and kind of facilitate together, ensure that everyone's voices are being heard and being listened to in that space, so everyone gets a chance to speak. And I think Mike is going to pop you all into breakout rooms. You'll see a request come up on your screen, and then we'll come back for Q&A with the speakers after that. I think the request should be coming up soon. There you go. You just accept join and you'll be taken to your breakout rooms. Thank you, everyone.
Mike, just to facilitate the breakout rooms, because there is so many people on the call, I might just start from the bottom of the breakout room list to see if anyone is left on their own and shift them into a room with others. If you start at the top, then we'll get through it a bit quicker, okay? Thanks.
It's a lot of people to put into breakout rooms, isn't it? We need music for this. Music for the breakout room section. Almost there, everyone. Just a few more people left to go in, I think. Yeah, David, I've seen your note in the chat, and we'll try and sort that issue for you.
Fedzilla, that was amazing. Your poem was absolutely beautiful.
Thank you, Rob. I'm not going to lie, with the feedback, my ego is... It's been a year that I haven't been able to get the energy off stage, so it's been so nice to perform, especially with eyes and ears of this caliber and diversity. It's done me good, but also really thank you for allowing me to perform. And it's been an incredible time and challenge to just speaking with Rhiannon, who gave me the brief on everything. It put a spark in my head, and I made a joke to her after I did the opening performance that in the evening I had hit this big frustration because I realized that I had just spent 8 minutes talking about how we need to create change. And so I myself had to do it. There was absolutely no more excuse. If I'm willing to speak in front of 200 people and speak my heart out, I need to stand by it. So I thank you for that.
Well, thank you.
You're live on record committing to that now, Fed. You'll never escape it.
Okay, and Carne and Mia, was that okay for you? All good? Carne, I don't know what was going on with somebody just had their microphone. Somebody had their microphone unmuted in your thing. I'm sorry about that. Was it okay apart from that, everybody?
Yes.
All good.
Yeah, it's fine. Fine. Time went by really quickly. I didn't time my talk properly, so I ended up gabbling, I'm sure. Apologies for that, but it was great.
I think it was just a mistake. Couple mics unmuted back to back, so it wasn't anything other than that, really. So yeah.
How long are we going to now give them in the breakout rooms? How long left?
We're actually ahead of time, so
10 minutes.
So
10 minutes from now.
Maybe give them 12.
Sorry.
Give them 12
in total.
Is it 2 minutes on this one, Rich? Is he still, or has he disappeared?
Yeah, it's 2 minutes on this one. Bear in mind, we'd only have like 20 minutes for questions, so it's a compressed question period.
If we can keep the breakouts to 10, then it gives us a bit more question time, which I think would be good.
Okay, well, I'm going to give them 8 minutes, and then I'm going to give them. Then I'm going to shut them, and that'll give them 2 minutes more.
I think a little less than that, Mike. So 5 and then close. So
5 minutes then close.
Yeah, because they've had like 4 minutes, most people anyway. But let's just help out. So is anyone on the call in this main space who is looking for a breakout room, who's longing for a breakout room, who hasn't been put in one?
I'm going to sign Patrick just because he's just turned up.
Okay, that's great. If not, just hang out in here. That's cool.
Tony yeah, Tony Webster.
Tony Web, I can't see him.
Tony's in the main room here, but I think is hanging out in the main room.
Oh, or he might be in a one on his own.
Ah, right, okay.
Literally.
Okay, Tony, give us 1 sec.
Just playing Minecraft instead of going to a breakout room.
I was observing this morning that although it can be a bit clunky with all of this, you know, the Zoom mute going off, I've sat in so many where you're only allowed to look at it on YouTube, and it's all very distant. And even though this can be a bit clunky sometimes, at least it's human.
Yeah.
I like that thing about it.
Rich, how many people have we had on the call? What's the kind of highest number we've had on this particular call so far?
200.
Yeah, 200.
Yeah, I think we got up to about 188, and we just topped 1,000 on Twitter.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Tony, forgive me. I'm trying to find you, Tony. We'll try and get you in a space, but you're also welcome to hang out in here with us. And oh, has he gone?
I think it's happened.
Oh well, there you go. The Zoom ghosts.
Magic.
Rich, can you share the doc to collate that you'll be placing people's questions in, please?
Oh yeah, Rich, can we have that link?
Yeah. I'll share it to you privately just in case people see it in the history of the chat.
We've done very well. Like something I'm part of in Totnes that just did its first online meeting, and it got horribly kind of Zoom bombed with just hideous things. And we've done all of these, and we haven't done the nonsense at all. It's been great.
But they can't do it because we got this, because we set it up. Hopefully, so they can.
Great.
Seems to work so far.
Famous last words, Mike.
I know. Sorry, Nick. I take it all back.
Tony, you are here. Sorry, my friend. I can't find you on the breakout room list to pop you in. Are you okay hanging out here with us?
Yeah, no, fine. Not a problem. Right. It's just a bit weird. I ended up in a room with somebody who had only been in the meeting for 5 minutes.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So she recommended
everything that's already happened.
Yes.
So what excuse did you make to go, Tony? Sorry, you haven't been here long enough. I'm going.
No, she felt uncomfortable because she didn't really have anything to talk about. But I thought going into another breakout room would have been easy. Otherwise, I would have stayed and just chatted with her about.
Yeah, apologies for that.
Yeah.
It's hard with 200 people on the call. It's hard sometimes to find someone in the way Zoom shows you. Amanda, are you okay hanging out with us here in the main room just for a few minutes more?
Yes, it's actually almost a privilege to be able to do that. Nice to see everybody. I was on earlier and I had to go to a different meeting, so I've just come back.
Oh, welcome.
And myself and everybody else on a vacant room, on a breakout room, so I can wait. I can chat with the gentleman who needs someone to chat with. I'm very flexible.
Yeah.
Fantastic. It's only another couple minutes anyway, right, Mike?
Yeah.
Okay.
You can help yourself to crisps. We have the best crisps in the group anyway for our speakers. So tuck in hula hoops.
All right, I have a question for you all. It's totally random. So I've been only recently watching the Great British Baking Show, and y'all love some passion fruit. And I feel like, I mean, I like passion fruit and I wish we had more of it, but like, I feel like so many people make some like passion fruit curd or put some passion fruit in something. And I'm wondering what that's about.
Rob, do you want to take that question? We could run the Q&A like this.
I have no idea. I haven't noticed a particular. I thought like a couple of years ago it was avocados. Everyone was going mad for avocado.
Well, I mean, I live in California. We got avocados, but like so many of the bakers put passion fruit and stuff. And I was like, I did not realize that passion fruit was such a big deal in the UK.
I think it might be something to do with the supermarkets wanting it to be a big deal.
We've got 45 seconds before people come back.
Okay, so 45 seconds.
Finders talking about passion fruits.
The Passion Fruit Consortium like did a bunch of marketing and paid them to use passion fruit in all their desserts.
Look at Carne Ross's principles of where does power lie.
It's a great show though, right?
Yes.
I've been making a lot because of that show. So
I love a show where everyone's nice to each other.
I'm glad that it's not just me that loves it, Mia. I always feel guilty, but I love it.
Okay, 10 seconds, and we're going to...
Yeah, that's me. That's all good.
Rhiannon, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. Welcome back from the breakout rooms. I hope that you had interesting and fulfilling conversations. Sorry that the time was so short to reflect such rich questions and things, but we wanted to get to Q&A with our speakers. So I would love you to pop your questions, any questions you have to share with the speakers into the chat, please. And whilst you're doing that, we're just going to hear a couple of minutes reflection from each of our speakers on you know, what stood out for them from the other speakers' talks. So we'll pop over to you, Kate, to start, if that's all right. What couple of minutes on what stood out from you from what other people were saying. Thank you.
I was really struck that what I'm talking, so there's so many different ways of engaging in change making, and I was really struck that what I'm talking about is, so the principle I talked about was go where the energy is. Right, which means it immediately goes to the people who are ready, like we're on it, yeah. And it's moving into that space. And then both Carne and Mia were talking very much about actually find the people whom this is intolerable, detestable, find whether, it's familiar to me because we think of, it's familiar in the sense that when we, in the way we think at Doughnut Economics Action Lab about our role, we think of the way that what we're doing only works if we're part of a much, much bigger ecosystem that connects with a lot of other change makers. It would never work if it was the only way you were going. So it was just really fantastic to hear such different approaches together. And then I was actually sending messages to my colleague Rob saying, oh, now I'd love to bring some of what they're saying into our work as well, so that we start to bring in those questions of noticing where does it seem like the energy isn't because people are, as Mia puts it, you know, they cannot be themselves. So they're not expressed and they're not able to connect, and yet there's so much to be released there. So that's the, I'm not going to try and add more. That was the big thing for me that I really felt, and it's I want to reflect on this. I really want to take it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. And Mia, what reflections did you have from hearing the other speakers?
In like both listening to Carne and Kate and then hearing what Kate just said, it's making me think about, well, first of all, like this book that I just read by Sarah Horowitz called Mutualism, and the work that someone who I know here in the States, this man called Eric Liu, he runs something called Citizens University, which is not about like citizenship as a legal thing, but like our belonging to community, our belonging to each other. And that so many of us really underestimate how powerful we are, and that change actually never is instigated by, you know, the mayor or whomever, right? It's us. And I think that we have learned to be to underestimate how powerful we are. And I think, you know, going where the energy is also about going where the power is. So that I'm just sitting with that right now. Just like how, like that, even though I do this work, that even my imagination about what I think is possible among, you know, me and the people I'm in community with is actually still much larger than I've been considering.
Thank you, Mia. Thank you. And Carne, over to you for some reflections as well.
Well, I too am very struck by what Mia just said about realizing our power. I think this is always for me the thing that it comes down to is people are extraordinarily powerful when they put their minds to it. They have extraordinary imaginations and ability to see things through, and the most humble and least the people you least expect are sometimes the most powerful. When I was in Occupy Wall Street, the people who really made the working groups and the actions that followed Occupy tick and come to life were not the loudmouths like me who stood up in Zuccotti Park and gave speeches. They were the people who sat at the back and didn't say anything and made things happen and had humility. And I found really, really inspiring. That Occupy taught me that there is enormous power in the many, and that it's an unrealized power. And if only we could realize it, we would be able to change everything. I think we are deeply, deeply stuck in particular ways of thinking, and which is why what Kate is proposing with Doughnut Economics is so powerful, because it's a really powerful beautifully elegant. I've always thought this ever since reading the book, a beautifully elegant idea about living within our planetary boundaries, but also living well within our planetary boundaries. And it brings together so many different ideas into a simple concept, and it's thus very easily comprehensible and transmissible. And it's really exciting to hear from Kate how it's already propagating lots of different iterations around the world.
Thank you, Carne. Yeah, and we've got a lot of questions coming in the chat here. I'm going to pick a couple out in a second, but I'm actually going to jump the queue with one of my own questions to start us off. And yeah, I think mainly towards Mia and Kate, but Carne, please do jump in if you have knowledge in this area as well. I'm interested in what kind of policies on the bigger level, and I'm aware that this is giving power to kind of government actors rather than ourselves, and please tell me if there's more radical ways of doing this, but what are some of the bigger policies like UBI, and maybe there are others that could put us in a position where imagination could flourish for many, many people? Because through a lot of this week, I've been thinking, well, isn't having the time to imagine it and create a privilege? Isn't that something you can only do when you have time? And then I'm also being challenged in that thought by what you're saying, Mia, and actually by what Suhaina said last week, which is actually people who are in the most difficult situations actually have the most imagination and the most creativity. So, you know, I'm interested in this idea of how can we enable everyone to be in a situation where they can imagine, because it feels like a luxury but you know, not.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I do think that there are ways in which people's imagination is limited when they don't have their basic needs met, because what they're using their imagination for is survival, right? Not necessarily like fixing, you know, like creating a future, opportunity, things like that. You know, I keep going back to the fact that like things we need to live as human beings, food, shelter, education, healthcare, love and care, like those things are human rights. And if we're not like we should have those things for free. Like there should be no barriers to any of us accessing those things. So I actually think that when I think about policy, like it needs to be incredibly bold and ensure that people do not have barriers to getting their basic needs met. And inside of capitalism, obviously having access to money is one of those things, but I think that it also means like, you know, we should have universal housing. We should have universal, you know, in America, we don't have fucking universal health care. We should have universal childcare, like all these things that like are just basic needs. Everyone should have access to them. And the way that they're structured, right? This is where the power of the people comes in. The way that they're structured, what they look like those are the things that need to be determined by communities. So that like, you know, what universal housing looks like in New York City is going to be very different from what it looks like in Jackson, Mississippi.
I'll just jump in with a comment. I'll come from a different space and I can see some of the comments people are putting in the chat. So I'm going to just come from somewhere else, which is in Amsterdam. The city government decided to adopt the donut as the model for their city. In fact, they launched it and released it in April 2020 at the height of the COVID infection in that city, because they said, you know, in the midst of this, how are we going to emerge from emergency? And this is the vision we want to set out. And they have put at the heart of their circularity strategy. So just to hark back to what Rob said after I spoke, which is boundaries can unleash our creativity. So here's the policy of circular economy in Amsterdam. They say by 2050, we are going to be a fully circular city, which nobody actually knows what that means yet. That's like a moonshot. We don't know what that means, but it's not good enough to just, you know, distant goal. No, by 2030, a decade, we're going to be 50% using circular materials. So half of the materials we're using in the city are going to be being reused. They're reused and refurbished and reconnected. Decade still too far away. By 2022, 10% of materials that are in government procurement contracts will be circular materials. Now, I love that. Big, long goal, decadal ambition, next year promise. Think of that creativity in the imagination that it would kick off if you live in a city that it was just really clear legislatively that this is going to become a circular economy. What that means in terms of textiles, in terms of food, in terms of construction. They've got living lab areas of the city where they're just doing circular construction. How are we going to build houses in this way? Reusing materials. I get contacted by architecture schools and urban planners in Amsterdam who you can see there's this creativity being unleashed because that clear, long regulation with immediate impact is coming in. And I see an energy that's released there and an imagination in terms of urban design that's released there that I just am not seeing, certainly in the country I live in and elsewhere. So it's just, to me, it's a really powerful example of what governments can do, and some are doing, regulatory clarity of the boundaries, and it unleashes. And of course, there's something beautiful and fabulous and incredibly creative about reusing building spaces and reinventing the materials and letting us see the histories and the layers. We love that. We love that creativity of it. So I have high hopes about the circular economy being a space that really allows people artistically to unleash their imagination.
Great, thank you, Kate. Thanks so much. And we've actually got some speaker-specific questions coming through. So I'm going to go through a question for each of you now. First one to Carne, and that's from Mothir and Ben. Is one of you here to unmute your mic and ask your question?
Hi, Rhiannon. Hi, Carne. Hi. No, I just asked this question because I'm just really interested in cognitive metaphors. Because we talk about imagination, and Shelley, who is a poet, and he talked about how poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world, and poetry is all about cognitive metaphors, how we construct our language, how we construct our understanding that we then move out from. And so the question I was just, because it just struck me when you said kill the king, there were two metaphors there that are very important in this current moment around gender and also death as winning. And I'm not just saying that, you know, individually that, you know, we can't use those metaphors, but when we are collective, we also get into this kind of PC exhaustion when we start talking about language too much. There's a balance somewhere, but I'm just wondering where that balance is, where we have to regenerate our language capacities to think outside the box and create new things, but also not get too involved in like, oh, you've said that and you're wrong and blah, blah, blah. So where's the balance in finding this space?
Well, you're trying to find a metaphor that resonates with people. And the point of Kill the King was twofold. One is that it is the point of chess, is to get rid of the king. That's the point of chess. I mean, there's thousands of different permutations of moves in chess, an infinity of permutations of all the different moves, but there's only one objective. And I think where it came from was I felt that in many political movements and activist groups I was aware of and part of, they sometimes forgot that this was the point. The process became the point. And the other thing is the anarchist in me, and I am an unashamed anarchist, which is I don't believe in kings and masters. You know, I'm always in favor of killing the king and indeed the queen, because I don't believe in royalty. I don't believe in hierarchy. Yes, it's a slightly provocative metaphor, but slightly light-hearted as well. You'll have to forgive me that.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to add, because imagination allows you to think of things differently. The Queen's Gambit in the film, it was talking really interestingly about, it's actually about surrender. It's about the king surrendering and understanding at a particular point, it surrenders. And this brings in the spirituality, but when we know that we are wrong, we don't just continue acting in that way. So there's different ways that we can think about things. That's all, it's just interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and we've got a question for Mia now from Hira Hussein about participatory democracy in different cultural contexts. Are you here to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, thank you. Great pleasure to be asking this question to Mia while reading her book. So my question is that we hear a lot about participatory democracy, but I find that culture underpins a lot of the interactions that we have in countries where you have indigenous populations, colonizers, migrants, different generations. There's a lot of cultural an identity gets muddled up, and I wonder if you have any thoughts about what participatory culture making could look like.
Oh, I love that question. I mean, part of it I feel like is that certainly in the States, I feel like we do not have a lot of stamina for holding each other's inherent humanity while we are also in conflict. I feel like in many ways we are a very immature culture, and we tend to be reactionary, inflammatory. We want to, it's like there's all this important exploration of boundary setting. But sometimes we think that setting a boundary means that we cut somebody out entirely, or we're gonna banish them forever, right? So I think part of it is that we actually need to build some of the tolerance that collaboration actually requires. And if I'm channeling my therapist, she talks about going into places of conflict with the assumption that everyone is going to get what they need, not that everybody's gonna have to compromise. And that when you do that, when you go in and you're like, we are all going to get our needs met, we are all going to come out of this feeling like we were heard and the things that we want are actually happening, then you're forced to not kind of be either there are these two binaries and we have to meet in the middle, right? Because often there's no fucking middle, let's be real, between me and a white supremacist, not a whole lot of middle ground. But when we insist on collaboration where everyone's needs are met, then we have to actually examine what are our actual needs? What are the things that we're really looking for? And then it forces us to find third and fourth and fifth and ways of getting to the thing, as opposed to like, I'm over here and this person is over here. And I think especially when we're talking about, I mean, I'm thinking about like indigenous culture that has experienced colonization, so that like, and I don't just mean indigenous to the United States, I mean in lots of places, right? Everywhere has some, everybody got some is indigenous to some place. Where colonization has happened and the elders are actually holding a colonized view of something, and the young people want to return to like what is pre-colonial and like all of the stuff that comes up there. And I just think there's just stuff that we just have to be a bit better at, like wrestling with it and holding each other with some grace, and not forgetting that, not allowing ourselves to forget that the people who we're in conflict with are like full, whole human beings, right? Because what that does is it doesn't dehumanize them, right? I'm not dehumanized by white supremacy. White supremacists are dehumanized by white supremacy. And I think that like, we have to hold our own humanity enough to not allow ourselves to think of other people as less than human. And that don't mean that I need to be friends with white supremacists or like sympathize or none of that. But it does mean that I continually challenge myself to ensure that like when I, you know, hear somebody say something racist or see something, you know, like, or read something, that's still a human being. And that, that their humanity is like the thing that is hopeful, right? Like keeping that is the thing that's hopeful. I hope that is helpful to you.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts.
Great, thank you, Hira, and Mia as well. So I've got a couple of questions coming through for Kate now. I'm just gonna roll two together. So one question is about how does one go about talking to one's peers and professors about the rich ideas of doughnut economics? And we've got another one about can we adopt doughnut economics in the global south? And I think that could be an interesting question for all of our speakers. How do all of these ideas translate into the global south as a context as well? So Kate, do you want to start by answering those two?
Yeah, great. So thank you. So the first question, how can we talk about it with our peers and professors? I'm going to pick up on the professors. So one of the most brilliant things that's happened in the last 5-6 years is a movement of economic students, particularly called Rethinking Economics, Plural Economics, who have realized that the subject they're being taught in no way equips them for the future. And they are rising up within economics departments around the world and demanding new economic thinking, decolonizing economics. And it's phenomenal, the pressure that they're putting from within on the subject. To me, the most powerful thing to do is just bring the picture. Bring it, you know, without a bigger agenda, just bringing the picture and saying, can we share this goal? Is this a goal? Do we understand this goal? Is this a goal for humanity? If so, then what if this is the goal? Then what kind of economy would we create? So economics doesn't start with the goal, it starts with supply and demand. It starts with the constructs of the economy, and then the goal tacitly emerges in a room, which is this sort of endless economic growth. And students are so hoodwinked by it, they don't realize that it's happening. It happened to me. I didn't realize that I've been given this implicit goal. So to come up front with the vision of the goal and then ask backwards what kind of economy would be in service to this, I think is very powerful. And to the credit of the best economics professors, they embrace it and they open up in a situation where, because it's such a big question, they no longer have the answer. They're no longer the authority in the room who has the theory and the mastery and the equations, but actually it's this very big open question. And then the second question about can we adapt? I think that was the question, adapt doughnut economics to the global south. So I'm going to talk specifically about that city portrait I showed. So the global doughnut is intended for the world. The social foundations come from the Sustainable Development Goals, which means their credibility, they're flawed, but the credibility of the SDGs is that all the governments in the world agreed that all people in the world have a claim to this. So it's a starting point. And then the outside is the planetary boundaries of the Earth system. When we downscale it to the city, we began in the global north. So we began, and I showed you Amsterdam. The reason we began there is because global north cities and countries have the responsibility, historic and present, to move first and fastest to reduce their global footprint and come back within planetary boundaries. So we began there. But actually the really exciting work that we're doing at the moment in Doughnut Economics Action Lab is working with a group of partners from the global south who've approached us. This is what I mean by go where the energy is. It's those who've approached us and said, we want to use this in our communities, in our context, in our cities, in our nations. We said, great, let's build a team. and we're just about to start. So how do they see that this methodology needs to be adapted to work for the context and interests and needs of their cities and places? And so we're just beginning to make a methodology. And again, we'll open source that methodology and share it, and people can continually adapt it and work with it. So yes, very much so. And in the process of doing that, we're going to, of course, share it on our platform, and everybody can contribute and comment on that. So if anybody's interested, and I saw a couple of people saying, are there jobs? And everything that we do is open. And if anyone wants to sign up to our newsletter, our website is doughuteconomics.org. If you sign up to our newsletter, you will find out all about these open consultation of the methodology and any jobs that we're advertising. We'd love to see that.
Great, thank you, Kate. I don't know if anyone else wanted to come in on just applying some of the ideas in the context of the Global South at all. If not, we can move on to another question. So I think, yeah, this is an interesting one for all our speakers. What is the barrier for policymakers or for these policies and ideas becoming a reality? So what obstacles do we need to overcome as community builders, activists, councillors to get these radical policies, ideas adopted and made into a reality? So maybe what do you see as some of the main barriers, and perhaps how do we go about overcoming them? Carne, should we start with you then?
Sure. It's a great question. It's really important and difficult. I mean, the main barriers are, of course, the current system, the way people think. That's one barrier, which you can overcome by talking differently about a problem, envisaging solutions. There is also the institutional straitjackets that people wear, whether in government, civil service, or in different bureaucracies, which are in different ways responsible for that issue. And I think there are two ways of doing this. One is engagement with those institutions one by one, where you seek to convince them one by one, and that's a perfectly respectable and viable method, and can work. And I think understanding the humanity of the people inside those institutions is very important. As somebody who's come from the heart of government, I know what it's like to be treated as inhuman, and I know the power of being treated humanely and being treated as a serious interlocutor in persuading me, the bureaucrat, to do something. But the other is to create the thing itself separately, is to assume that the institution doesn't exist and to work to create the vision, to embody the vision that you wish to see happen. I think that is you know, when plausible, and it's not always plausible, that's a very powerful way of making change visible and exciting for other people. And I do think there's something very exciting about the moment we're in at the moment. I haven't felt this before, but I do think we're in a moment of great change, of people suddenly understanding the environmental and social crisis that we're in, that capitalism is coming to some kind of end, and people wishing to see alternatives for the future. And I think there's a real role for leaders to step up by example, not through coercion, but by example, to set out what can be done.
Thank you. And Mia, do you want to chip in any thoughts there as well?
Yeah, I mean, I +1 to everything that Carne said. I think that, you know, we often come up with really great policy, but we don't do the kind of mindset changing and culture change that needs to happen in order for the policy to be enacted and upheld as it's meant to. So I think that, you know, I mean, like so much of the work that I do is in culture change. So I feel like we have to make sure that we're not underestimating what needs to change about how we think and feel in order to, like, we have the policy ideas, right? Those exist. It really is about will. And that will is constricted, right, by a scarcity mindset, by, you know, wealth hoarding, white supremacy, patriarchy, capitalism, like all of the mindsets that are kind of required to continue those systems of oppression are the things that are barriers to creating the world we want. And I think we also have to remember that those systems of oppression all live in each of us. And if we're not doing our own work to excavate the ways in which they limit our beliefs about ourselves and other people, then we're not really doing the work, right? The work, it's not about changing the minds of people out there. It's us and our own communities.
Great, thank you, Mia. And Kate, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, so again, I'm just going to think of the example I've been giving of bringing the donut to the city scale. We find that a lot of city councillors and politicians actually really engage with it. We've got a lot of councillors from cities across the world contacting us now saying, can we do a workshop? We want to find out about this. Some starting to adopt it, from Nanaimo in Canada to Brussels to Cambridge just recently adopted it. So city councillors are adopting it. City residents and community organisations are mobilising it, and I showed that from Melbourne and Devon. So yes, a lot of community group are mobilising around it. Where the stop comes is business. So people say, is the donut anti-business? Is business welcome here? And the answer is, it's not at all anti-business. Business is definitely welcome here, because if business as an enterprise, let's talk about enterprise, is going to be part of the future, then it's welcome to this conversation. But we don't pull the punches. So we're very clear that the starting point is the donut. And the starting point is that we need to create economies that meet the needs of all people within the means of the living planet. Now, enterprise and business can be a part of that, but it needs to make sure that it's in service to that. And so we always do a workshop. And I'll very quickly show you. We have a little signboard here. 5 design traits of any organization, but I'm going to speak to business right now. So we all say to business, you are welcome to this space if your purpose is aligned with meeting the needs of all people within the means of the living planet. If your purpose is to sequester carbon, or to bring health to this community, or to supply this community with things they need. If your networks, the way you relate to your customers, your members, your suppliers, your community, is reinforcing of those values. If your governance, who has voice in your enterprise, who is even in the room when decisions are made, and what are the metrics by which you judge your success, and what are the incentives by which you incentivize your staff, and are they aligned with your purpose? But now let's go down deep, right? The further down we go, the deeper this stuff gets. So how is your enterprise owned? Because whether your enterprise is owned by its founding entrepreneur, or 7th-generation family, or its employees, or the state, or venture capital shareholders, these different ownership designs, and they're all concurrent in the world, they have profound consequences for how your enterprise is financed and what that finance is expecting and demanding every quarter. And when your enterprise makes profits, where those profits are distributed, and whether they're reinvested in your purpose or whether they're extracted for shareholders and owners. So business is welcome, but business needs to be designed to be fit for the future. So we welcome you to look deep inside the design of your own enterprise. Now, some enterprises, and probably more recently set up one, say, yes, we're a purpose-driven organization, and we've exactly designed the way we're owned, the way we're financed and governed and networked to make that possible. And then there's plenty of business out there that this is a very, very, very challenging conversation, because the way they're owned and financed actually is pretty much locking them out of transformative purpose. So I'm saying it tongue in cheek, business is welcome, but business needs to transform. Last thing I'll say is we know that when a disruptive idea like the donut meets business as usual, something's going to get transformed. And our job is to ensure it's not us. So we go right into conversation with business, but we always go to these 5 design traits and deep into the design of your enterprise. And can you transform, or are you stuck in the past? Right. And I began by saying, this is where it gets tricky, but actually, but in a way, we go where the energy is, and then suddenly, of course, you're going to hit this wall of consent, and let's go in. Let's have that conversation. And this is a conversation that needs to be had in every company. And you need to be looking deep inside your enterprise and asking yourselves whether you're fit to be part of the future or not.
Great, thank you, Kate. And I think that's a brilliant place to end, and answers some of the questions that were coming up in the chat around how does business fit into all of this as well. And I love your prop that was just ready to go there. And yeah, also this idea of, yeah, we're willing to work with business and be in that conversation with them, but coming with a really strong kind of moral starting point and saying this is where we're engaging from. We're not moving from that position in that negotiation. I think that's really powerful, because so often it can become co-opted. Right, now, thank you so much, everyone, for all of your questions. And we're going to now move over to hear from our keynote listeners. So Cassie Robinson is our first keynote listener. Cassie, what are your thoughts on what you've heard so far? I wonder if you could share some thoughts and also what this points to in terms of, to use a term I know you're very fond of, what needs to be put in place in terms of building an imagination infrastructure. So that's the frameworks and support vital to such a flowering of imagination. Cassie, over to you.
Thanks, everyone. I've been spending the last 10 minutes panicking because I thought my Wi-Fi wasn't working. So I've been a bit distracted and I've had to move into a different space. But really have appreciated hearing everyone's questions and obviously from the speakers. And yeah, I'm not very good actually at summarizing things, so I'm probably going to meander a little bit. But you know, I was particularly moved by what Mia spoke about, and I think you know, I think such a big thing in all of this is about who gets to imagine, who's really a part of shaping different futures. So I think that's something you know, that I keep thinking about in the work that I'm doing, and one of the things that I'm really struck by and what Mia's said, and it's also made me think about what's the relationship between imagination and belonging. I think listening to, you know, a huge fan of Kate's work, and I think one of the things that's so powerful about Doughnut Economics is it really has lit people's imagination up, because it really is suggesting something very different. And I think that's really important, and we underestimate, or certainly in the world of social innovation, often we're imagining something different in the existing system rather than really imagining something that's transformative. And you know, the Doughnut it's a new philosophy. It has a big change narrative to it, and I think that's really important as well. And that's probably one of the reasons why I think collective imagination is so important, and we need to think about what it means to really resource that, because still so much change work I think is happening in just kind of plaster sticking and making things better, and but not transforming. And even just seeing some of the things in the chat and some of the questions and some of the examples, this might be a bit controversial, but whilst I think that things like citizen assemblies and deliberative democracy has a role, I think again, often that comes, that the questions have already been defined. You know, that's often, again, we're assuming a set of things are already agreed or in place or are the right things to be deliberating. And for me, imagination is the soil. And I think it's further upstream, or it's before a lot of these kind of more deliberative democracy approaches and processes. And again, I kind of am really keen that people sort of consider that more. I feel like I'm not pulling out enough from the different talks, so I apologize. I think because Rob sort of said about the imagination infrastructure. So as I've been listening, I have, you know, I'm always thinking of, so what does this mean? How can we do more? How can we resource it? How can we support this kind of work? And I do feel like this, the reason I talk about infrastructure and imagination infrastructure is because, you know, infrastructure is about long-term patient investment. And I feel like holding a space and resourcing a space for long-term investment in our collective imagination is something that we need to do. And I also think of infrastructure as being about care and about capacity. So again, how do we resource taking care of and building capacity of communities to imagine? And I also think of infrastructure as being generative. You know, one of the things, again, that I really like about the Doughnut is you know, the making of things, the materializing of things, that those sparks are really important, like giving tangibility to things for others to then build on and grow from and be generative as a result of. And I think of imagination infrastructure as trying to give form and scaffolding to people's imagination. So yeah, that I've been sketching, I've been roughly sketching what might this imagination infrastructure look like. And for me, it's the soil, it's the materials, it's the conditions, it's the long-term investment, it's the care, and it's the capacity, and it's the spaces as well. You know, what if the town halls or the community centres, the kind of civic or democratic spaces were filled with practices around our collective imagination. And that's one of the things that I'm hoping that we can be part of resourcing and bringing to life more, and seeding and growing with many of you here.
Great, thank you so much, Cassie. And really great to hear that framing of infrastructure, and to have you in the room as the key funder in the UK movement to help us do this work and to build this work. So thank you for being here and sharing your reflections. Chidi, I'd love to come to you now as our other keynote listener to hear what thoughts and feelings, ideas have been bubbling up for you as you've been listening to our speakers.
Thanks very much. There really was quite a lot, and that's because the content was so rich. So much was said, and the sequence within which it was said was actually really beautiful. I really like the idea that we started off with at least a hypothetically academic assessment by Professor Raworth, and then we walk into realpolitik with Carne, and then we end with this sort of beautiful, lyrical, organic Mia. The way that I saw it actually was that I've read, I'm holding on to Kate Raworth's book right now as we speak, because it's an outstanding read. It's an outstanding read if you did economics at university, because it's one of those things that takes a diagram like a donut. It's just something as basic and simple as a donut. Professor Raworth says, no one's afraid of donuts. They might be afraid of economics. I changed that slightly and say everybody loves a donut. We might not love economics, but you definitely love a donut. And you love it when you read it, because the idea that rather than arguing about big macroeconomic themes that we all know of, are you a Keynesian, are you a capitalist, are you a Schumpeterian, rather than those big ideological arguments in economics, you actually burrow down to what is this thing useful for? What are we doing with it? It's a microeconomic theme, but it's the idea that you're aiming to avoid underuse. You don't want to be on the inside of the donut. You're aiming to avoid overexploitation. So you want to be in a sustainable middle. That's a profoundly powerful idea. Just diagrammatically shown, it's a profoundly powerful idea. I had that and I was running with it. And then Mr. Ross, whose 9 principles I thought were outstanding. And the context, of course, is, as I said, realpolitik. It's the idea that political power defines so much of the way that we understand economics and the way that we understand the social and political mores that are generated by that economics. So much so that stifles. I think it's very, very important, because unless you feel uncomfortable, you don't understand change, the need for change. And what, of course, happened next was that Mia particularized it for me. She turned around and said, let me read this out. The place in which you fit will not exist until you make it, which I thought was really outstanding, because it talks about what our actual project is. This project was about creating a new place for us all to fit. And if you sort of think of the 3 speakers and their 3 books as 3 different dimensions, it's a sort of 3-dimensional representation of what we want to see in future. Contemporary politics has really, really obvious constraints. One of those constraints is that every 4 years, a new crew show up and they want to talk about what they want to do in the next 4 years. But we have slightly longer term considerations than that, right? Our planet is in danger. We need to talk about sustainability in terms that are more than just what the next crew want to do for the next 4 years. So you didn't mention that I advise XR, but I do, and I feel very strongly that XR has 3 demands. Tell the truth, act now, and use people assemblies. Those are profoundly important things. They feed into the narrative we've heard this evening, because by the time you get beyond career politicians who are working for the next 4 years, and you get beyond established ideological ideas, by the time you get beyond those things, you're firmly embedded in different types of citizens' assemblies, different types of connectivity, different types of imagining what your future can be. We have all of these shared goals, we have different ways of approaching it, but if we connect better, I'm going to sort of paraphrase some of what Maya talked about when she talked about, let me see, I wrote this down, ancestral memories of the way that societies used to work. If we can think about, if we can imagine, if we can envision, if we can discuss ways in which we're living entirely symbiotically, everything changes. And it can't sound cliched, because symbiosis is not what contemporary economics teaches us. It teaches us that there are constraints, that greed is good, non-satiety is one of the assumptions of conventional economics, that we should just keep on consuming for as much as we want to. There's no such thing as overconsumption, no such thing as greed. And all of those things are wrong. All of those things are wrong. And the only way you get out of it is if you go back. If you go back to a kind of an economic permaculture, if you go back to an indigenous way of looking at cohabiting with yourselves or with nature. And all three of the speakers talked directly towards that. I was sketching furiously all the way through, and I did this thing where I drew out a Maslow's hierarchy of wants thing, the little pyramid triangle. At the bottom, there's housing and clothing. But at the top of this one, at the top of the one that came out this evening, was the absolute need that we all have to imagine a better future and work towards it. Not to wear designer clothing, but to actually think that just to wear designer thoughts. That's what I thought this brought me to.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chidi. That was such a fantastic summary there. You've just done my job for me. Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. And it's great that you were sketching as well, because we're going to come to Fanny now to share this beautiful sketching and visual note-taking that she has been doing throughout this conversation. We've been so lucky to have Fanny at so many of our events, and we feel like you can't talk about imagination without this kind of playful drawing. So Fanny, are you there and ready to share us a bit of what you've been doing?
Yes, thank you so much, Rhiannon. Thank you so much to all of you, key speakers and listeners. It has been amazing. We'll show you the drawing right now and a bit of the evolution of it. Here we go. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Fanny. And I love, as everyone said, that image of the donut right there in the middle and all the other different bits coming through. And we'll be sharing all of these images and links at the end of the event on social media and on our Losing Control platform.